Garden.
She spent the afternoon working in her garden. She spent the afternoon working in her garden. The garden was full of colorful flowers. The garden was full of colorful flowers. They designed a new layout for their garden. They designed a new layout for their garden.
Plant.
She bought a new plant for her windowsill. She bought a new plant for her windowsill. The plant needed more sunlight to grow properly. The plant needed more sunlight to grow properly. They watered the plant every morning. They watered the plant every morning.
Flower.
She picked a beautiful flower from the garden. She picked a beautiful flower from the garden. The flower bloomed in early spring. The flower bloomed in early spring. They planted colorful flowers along the path. They planted colorful flowers along the path.
Tree.
She sat under the tree to enjoy the shade. She sat under the tree to enjoy the shade. The tree was over 100 years old. The tree was over 100 years old. They planted a new tree in the front garden. They planted a new tree in the front garden.
Shrub.
She trimmed the shrub to keep it neat. She trimmed the shrub to keep it neat. The shrub provided privacy in the garden. The shrub provided privacy in the garden. They planted several shrubs along the fence. They planted several shrubs along the fence.
Rose.
She grew beautiful roses in her garden. She grew beautiful roses in her garden. The rose bush was covered in pink blooms. The rose bush was covered in pink blooms. They gave her a bouquet of red roses. They gave her a bouquet of red roses.
Vegetable.
She grew vegetables in her allotment. She grew vegetables in her allotment. The vegetable garden produced a good harvest. The vegetable garden produced a good harvest. They planted various vegetables in the spring. They planted various vegetables in the spring.
Herb.
She grew fresh herbs in pots on the windowsill. She grew fresh herbs in pots on the windowsill. The herb garden included basil, thyme, and rosemary. The herb garden included basil, thyme, and rosemary. They used fresh herbs in their cooking. They used fresh herbs in their cooking.
Seed.
She planted the seeds in small pots. She planted the seeds in small pots. The seed packet contained instructions for planting. The seed packet contained instructions for planting. They saved seeds from their best plants. They saved seeds from their best plants.
Soil.
She prepared the soil before planting. She prepared the soil before planting. The soil was rich and fertile. The soil was rich and fertile. They tested the soil to check its pH level. They tested the soil to check its pH level.
Compost.
She added compost to improve the soil quality. She added compost to improve the soil quality. The compost heap was in the corner of the garden. The compost heap was in the corner of the garden. They made their own compost from kitchen scraps. They made their own compost from kitchen scraps.
Fertiliser.
She applied fertilizer to help the plants grow. She applied fertilizer to help the plants grow. The fertilizer was organic and environmentally friendly. The fertilizer was organic and environmentally friendly. They used natural fertilizer on their vegetables. They used natural fertilizer on their vegetables.
Watering can.
She filled the watering can from the tap. She filled the watering can from the tap. The watering can had a long spout for easy watering. The watering can had a long spout for easy watering. They used the watering can to water the potted plants. They used the watering can to water the potted plants.
Hose.
She unrolled the hose to water the lawn. She unrolled the hose to water the lawn. The hose was connected to the outdoor tap. The hose was connected to the outdoor tap. They stored the hose in the shed after use. They stored the hose in the shed after use.
Shovel.
She used a shovel to dig a hole for the tree. She used a shovel to dig a hole for the tree. The shovel was perfect for moving soil. The shovel was perfect for moving soil. They kept the shovel clean and sharp. They kept the shovel clean and sharp.
Spade.
She used a spade to turn over the soil. She used a spade to turn over the soil. The spade had a sharp edge for cutting through roots. The spade had a sharp edge for cutting through roots. They dug the vegetable bed with a spade. They dug the vegetable bed with a spade.
Rake.
She used a rake to gather fallen leaves. She used a rake to gather fallen leaves. The rake helped level the soil before planting. The rake helped level the soil before planting. They raked the lawn to remove dead grass. They raked the lawn to remove dead grass.
Trowel.
She used a trowel to plant the small seedlings. She used a trowel to plant the small seedlings. The trowel was perfect for working in tight spaces. The trowel was perfect for working in tight spaces. They carried a trowel in their gardening tool bag. They carried a trowel in their gardening tool bag.
Pruning shears.
She used pruning shears to trim the rose bushes. She used pruning shears to trim the rose bushes. The pruning shears were sharp and easy to use. The pruning shears were sharp and easy to use. They cleaned the pruning shears after each use. They cleaned the pruning shears after each use.
Wheelbarrow.
She pushed the wheelbarrow full of compost to the garden. She pushed the wheelbarrow full of compost to the garden. The wheelbarrow made it easy to transport heavy materials. The wheelbarrow made it easy to transport heavy materials. They used the wheelbarrow to move soil and plants. They used the wheelbarrow to move soil and plants.
Lawn.
She mowed the lawn every week during summer. She mowed the lawn every week during summer. The lawn was green and well maintained. The lawn was green and well maintained. They watered the lawn regularly to keep it healthy. They watered the lawn regularly to keep it healthy.
Lawnmower.
She started the lawnmower to cut the grass. She started the lawnmower to cut the grass. The lawnmower needed petrol before it would start. The lawnmower needed petrol before it would start. They stored the lawnmower in the garden shed. They stored the lawnmower in the garden shed.
Pot.
She planted the flowers in a large pot. She planted the flowers in a large pot. The pot had drainage holes at the bottom. The pot had drainage holes at the bottom. They arranged the pots on the patio. They arranged the pots on the patio.
Planter.
She filled the planter with colorful flowers. She filled the planter with colorful flowers. The planter was placed on the windowsill. The planter was placed on the windowsill. They bought a new planter for the balcony. They bought a new planter for the balcony.
Shed.
She stored all her gardening tools in the shed. She stored all her gardening tools in the shed. The shed was at the bottom of the garden. The shed was at the bottom of the garden. They organized the shed to make space for new tools. They organized the shed to make space for new tools.
Greenhouse.
She grew tomatoes in the greenhouse. She grew tomatoes in the greenhouse. The greenhouse protected the plants from frost. The greenhouse protected the plants from frost. They built a small greenhouse in their garden. They built a small greenhouse in their garden.
To plant.
She decided to plant sunflowers in the spring. She decided to plant sunflowers in the spring. They planted the seeds in rows for better organization. They planted the seeds in rows for better organization. We planted a new tree to replace the old one. We planted a new tree to replace the old one.
To water.
She watered the plants every morning. She watered the plants every morning. They watered the garden during the dry spell. They watered the garden during the dry spell. We need to water the vegetables more frequently in summer. We need to water the vegetables more frequently in summer.
To prune.
She pruned the rose bushes in late winter. She pruned the rose bushes in late winter. They pruned the trees to encourage new growth. They pruned the trees to encourage new growth. We should prune the shrubs to keep them tidy. We should prune the shrubs to keep them tidy.
To weed.
She spent the afternoon weeding the flower beds. She spent the afternoon weeding the flower beds. They weeded the vegetable patch regularly. They weeded the vegetable patch regularly. We need to weed the garden before planting new flowers. We need to weed the garden before planting new flowers.
To mow.
She mowed the lawn every Saturday morning. She mowed the lawn every Saturday morning. They mowed the grass before the party. They mowed the grass before the party. We should mow the lawn while the weather is good. We should mow the lawn while the weather is good.
To dig.
She dug a hole for the new tree. She dug a hole for the new tree. They dug the vegetable bed to prepare it for planting. They dug the vegetable bed to prepare it for planting. We need to dig deeper to remove all the roots. We need to dig deeper to remove all the roots.
To harvest.
She harvested the tomatoes when they were ripe. She harvested the tomatoes when they were ripe. They harvested the vegetables in late summer. They harvested the vegetables in late summer. We will harvest the apples in autumn. We will harvest the apples in autumn.
To sow.
She sowed the seeds in early spring. She sowed the seeds in early spring. They sowed the wildflower seeds across the meadow. They sowed the wildflower seeds across the meadow. We should sow the carrots directly in the ground. We should sow the carrots directly in the ground.
Weed.
She pulled out the weeds from between the flowers. She pulled out the weeds from between the flowers. The weeds were growing faster than the vegetables. The weeds were growing faster than the vegetables. They removed all the weeds to give the plants more space. They removed all the weeds to give the plants more space.
Root.
She carefully removed the root when transplanting the plant. She carefully removed the root when transplanting the plant. The root system was extensive and well developed. The root system was extensive and well developed. They checked the roots to see if the plant needed repotting. They checked the roots to see if the plant needed repotting.
Stem.
She cut the stem at an angle to help it absorb water. She cut the stem at an angle to help it absorb water. The stem was strong and supported the heavy flowers. The stem was strong and supported the heavy flowers. They noticed the stem was beginning to wilt. They noticed the stem was beginning to wilt.
Leaf.
She collected the fallen leaves in autumn. She collected the fallen leaves in autumn. The leaves turned yellow in the autumn. The leaves turned yellow in the autumn. They noticed the leaves were starting to curl. They noticed the leaves were starting to curl.
Petal.
She picked up the fallen petals from the ground. She picked up the fallen petals from the ground. The petals were soft and delicate. The petals were soft and delicate. They admired the colorful petals of the flowers. They admired the colorful petals of the flowers.
Bud.
She noticed the first buds appearing on the tree. She noticed the first buds appearing on the tree. The buds would soon open into beautiful flowers. The buds would soon open into beautiful flowers. They protected the buds from the late frost. They protected the buds from the late frost.
Bloom.
She waited for the roses to bloom in spring. She waited for the roses to bloom in spring. The garden was full of blooms during the summer. The garden was full of blooms during the summer. They enjoyed the beautiful bloom of the cherry trees. They enjoyed the beautiful bloom of the cherry trees.
To bloom.
The flowers began to bloom in early spring. The flowers began to bloom in early spring. They watched the roses bloom throughout the summer. They watched the roses bloom throughout the summer. We expect the tulips to bloom next month. We expect the tulips to bloom next month.
Sunlight.
She placed the plant where it would get plenty of sunlight. She placed the plant where it would get plenty of sunlight. The sunlight helped the vegetables grow quickly. The sunlight helped the vegetables grow quickly. They moved the pots to catch the morning sunlight. They moved the pots to catch the morning sunlight.
Shade.
She planted the ferns in a shady area with plenty of shade. She planted the ferns in a shady area with plenty of shade. The shade from the tree kept the plants cool. The shade from the tree kept the plants cool. They moved the delicate plants into the shade during hot weather. They moved the delicate plants into the shade during hot weather.
Mulch.
She spread mulch around the plants to retain moisture. She spread mulch around the plants to retain moisture. The mulch helped suppress weeds and keep the soil warm. The mulch helped suppress weeds and keep the soil warm. They used organic mulch made from bark and leaves. They used organic mulch made from bark and leaves.
Pest.
She used natural methods to control garden pests. She used natural methods to control garden pests. The pest problem was affecting the vegetable harvest. The pest problem was affecting the vegetable harvest. They identified the pest and treated it accordingly. They identified the pest and treated it accordingly.
Drought.
She watered the garden more frequently during the drought. She watered the garden more frequently during the drought. The drought caused many plants to wilt. The drought caused many plants to wilt. They installed a water collection system to prepare for drought. They installed a water collection system to prepare for drought.
Frost.
She covered the plants to protect them from frost. She covered the plants to protect them from frost. The early frost damaged the tender plants. The early frost damaged the tender plants. They brought the potted plants indoors before the frost. They brought the potted plants indoors before the frost.
Allotment.
She rented an allotment to grow her own vegetables. She rented an allotment to grow her own vegetables. The allotment was divided into several plots. The allotment was divided into several plots. They spent weekends working on their allotment. They spent weekends working on their allotment.
Bed.
She prepared a new flower bed in the front garden. She prepared a new flower bed in the front garden. The vegetable bed produced an excellent harvest. The vegetable bed produced an excellent harvest. They planted herbs in a raised bed. They planted herbs in a raised bed.
Tomato.
She grew tomatoes in the greenhouse. She grew tomatoes in the greenhouse. The tomatoes were ripe and ready to harvest. The tomatoes were ripe and ready to harvest. They planted tomato seedlings in early spring. They planted tomato seedlings in early spring.
Lettuce.
She planted lettuce in the vegetable bed. She planted lettuce in the vegetable bed. The lettuce grew quickly in the cool weather. The lettuce grew quickly in the cool weather. They harvested fresh lettuce for their salads. They harvested fresh lettuce for their salads.
Carrot.
She pulled up the carrots from the ground. She pulled up the carrots from the ground. The carrots were sweet and crunchy. The carrots were sweet and crunchy. They sowed carrot seeds directly in the soil. They sowed carrot seeds directly in the soil.
Potato.
She dug up the potatoes in autumn. She dug up the potatoes in autumn. The potatoes were stored in a cool, dark place. The potatoes were stored in a cool, dark place. They planted seed potatoes in early spring. They planted seed potatoes in early spring.
Onion.
She harvested the onions when the tops had dried. She harvested the onions when the tops had dried. The onions were stored in a mesh bag. The onions were stored in a mesh bag. They planted onion sets in the vegetable garden. They planted onion sets in the vegetable garden.
Basil.
She grew fresh basil in pots on the windowsill. She grew fresh basil in pots on the windowsill. The basil leaves were fragrant and perfect for cooking. The basil leaves were fragrant and perfect for cooking. They pinched off the basil flowers to encourage leaf growth. They pinched off the basil flowers to encourage leaf growth.
Rosemary.
She planted rosemary in a sunny spot in the garden. She planted rosemary in a sunny spot in the garden. The rosemary bush was drought-resistant and hardy. The rosemary bush was drought-resistant and hardy. They used fresh rosemary sprigs in their cooking. They used fresh rosemary sprigs in their cooking.
Thyme.
She grew thyme alongside other Mediterranean herbs. She grew thyme alongside other Mediterranean herbs. The thyme was perfect for seasoning roasted vegetables. The thyme was perfect for seasoning roasted vegetables. They harvested thyme throughout the growing season. They harvested thyme throughout the growing season.
Mint.
She planted mint in a container to prevent it from spreading. She planted mint in a container to prevent it from spreading. The mint grew vigorously and needed regular pruning. The mint grew vigorously and needed regular pruning. They used fresh mint leaves to make tea. They used fresh mint leaves to make tea.
Sunflower.
She planted sunflowers along the garden fence. She planted sunflowers along the garden fence. The sunflowers turned their heads to follow the sun. The sunflowers turned their heads to follow the sun. They harvested sunflower seeds in late summer. They harvested sunflower seeds in late summer.
Tulip.
She planted tulip bulbs in autumn for spring blooms. She planted tulip bulbs in autumn for spring blooms. The tulips created a colorful display in the garden. The tulips created a colorful display in the garden. They arranged the tulips in a vase on the table. They arranged the tulips in a vase on the table.
Daffodil.
She planted daffodils in the lawn for early spring color. She planted daffodils in the lawn for early spring color. The daffodils were the first flowers to bloom. The daffodils were the first flowers to bloom. They admired the cheerful yellow daffodils. They admired the cheerful yellow daffodils.
Lavender.
She grew lavender for its beautiful scent and purple flowers. She grew lavender for its beautiful scent and purple flowers. The lavender attracted bees and butterflies to the garden. The lavender attracted bees and butterflies to the garden. They dried lavender to use in potpourri. They dried lavender to use in potpourri.
Marigold.
She planted marigolds to deter pests from the vegetables. She planted marigolds to deter pests from the vegetables. The marigolds added bright orange and yellow to the garden. The marigolds added bright orange and yellow to the garden. They used marigold flowers in natural remedies. They used marigold flowers in natural remedies.
Bulb.
She planted spring-flowering bulbs in autumn. She planted spring-flowering bulbs in autumn. The bulbs would produce beautiful flowers next year. The bulbs would produce beautiful flowers next year. They stored the bulbs in a cool, dry place. They stored the bulbs in a cool, dry place.
Seedling.
She transplanted the seedlings into larger pots. She transplanted the seedlings into larger pots. The seedlings were ready to be moved outdoors. The seedlings were ready to be moved outdoors. They protected the delicate seedlings from frost. They protected the delicate seedlings from frost.
Cutting.
She took a cutting from the rose bush to propagate it. She took a cutting from the rose bush to propagate it. The cutting was placed in water to develop roots. The cutting was placed in water to develop roots. They successfully grew new plants from cuttings. They successfully grew new plants from cuttings.
To transplant.
She transplanted the seedlings into the garden bed. She transplanted the seedlings into the garden bed. They transplanted the tree to a better location. They transplanted the tree to a better location. We need to transplant these plants before they get too big. We need to transplant these plants before they get too big.
To propagate.
She learned to propagate plants from cuttings. She learned to propagate plants from cuttings. They propagated the herbs by dividing the root clumps. They propagated the herbs by dividing the root clumps. We can propagate this plant easily from seeds. We can propagate this plant easily from seeds.
Hoe.
She used a hoe to break up the soil and remove weeds. She used a hoe to break up the soil and remove weeds. The hoe was perfect for working between rows of vegetables. The hoe was perfect for working between rows of vegetables. They kept the hoe sharp for efficient weeding. They kept the hoe sharp for efficient weeding.
Fork.
She used a garden fork to aerate the soil. She used a garden fork to aerate the soil. The fork was useful for turning compost. The fork was useful for turning compost. They used the fork to lift potatoes without damaging them. They used the fork to lift potatoes without damaging them.
Secateurs.
She used secateurs to prune the small branches. She used secateurs to prune the small branches. The secateurs were sharp and made clean cuts. The secateurs were sharp and made clean cuts. They cleaned the secateurs after each use to prevent disease spread. They cleaned the secateurs after each use to prevent disease spread.
Gloves.
She wore gardening gloves to protect her hands. She wore gardening gloves to protect her hands. The gloves kept her hands clean while working with soil. The gloves kept her hands clean while working with soil. They put on thick gloves before handling thorny plants. They put on thick gloves before handling thorny plants.
Kneeler.
She used a kneeler to protect her knees while gardening. She used a kneeler to protect her knees while gardening. The kneeler could be flipped over to use as a seat. The kneeler could be flipped over to use as a seat. They found the kneeler very helpful for long gardening sessions. They found the kneeler very helpful for long gardening sessions.
Sprinkler.
She set up a sprinkler to water the lawn automatically. She set up a sprinkler to water the lawn automatically. The sprinkler rotated to cover the entire garden area. The sprinkler rotated to cover the entire garden area. They turned on the sprinkler during the dry spell. They turned on the sprinkler during the dry spell.
Dibber.
She used a dibber to make holes for planting seeds. She used a dibber to make holes for planting seeds. The dibber created uniform holes at the right depth. The dibber created uniform holes at the right depth. They found the dibber essential for planting bulbs. They found the dibber essential for planting bulbs.
Edging.
She trimmed the edging of the lawn to keep it neat. She trimmed the edging of the lawn to keep it neat. The edging separated the flower beds from the lawn. The edging separated the flower beds from the lawn. They installed stone edging around the vegetable beds. They installed stone edging around the vegetable beds.
Border.
She planted a colorful border along the garden path. She planted a colorful border along the garden path. The border was filled with perennials and annuals. The border was filled with perennials and annuals. They redesigned the border to include more native plants. They redesigned the border to include more native plants.
Perennial.
She planted perennials that would return year after year. She planted perennials that would return year after year. The perennial flowers bloomed every spring. The perennial flowers bloomed every spring. They preferred perennials because they required less maintenance. They preferred perennials because they required less maintenance.
Annual.
She planted annuals for summer color in the garden. She planted annuals for summer color in the garden. The annuals needed to be replanted each year. The annuals needed to be replanted each year. They chose annuals that would bloom all season long. They chose annuals that would bloom all season long.
Biennial.
She planted biennials that would flower in their second year. She planted biennials that would flower in their second year. The biennial plants required patience but were worth the wait. The biennial plants required patience but were worth the wait. They included biennials in their garden planning. They included biennials in their garden planning.
Drainage.
She improved the drainage in the flower bed by adding gravel. She improved the drainage in the flower bed by adding gravel. The drainage holes in the pots prevented waterlogging. The drainage holes in the pots prevented waterlogging. They checked the drainage before planting the new shrubs. They checked the drainage before planting the new shrubs.
pH.
She tested the soil pH to determine what plants would grow best. She tested the soil pH to determine what plants would grow best. The pH level affected the availability of nutrients. The pH level affected the availability of nutrients. They adjusted the pH by adding lime to the acidic soil. They adjusted the pH by adding lime to the acidic soil.
Nutrient.
She added organic matter to provide nutrients for the plants. She added organic matter to provide nutrients for the plants. The nutrients in the compost helped the vegetables grow. The nutrients in the compost helped the vegetables grow. They ensured the soil had all the essential nutrients. They ensured the soil had all the essential nutrients.
Organic.
She practiced organic gardening without chemical pesticides. She practiced organic gardening without chemical pesticides. The organic vegetables tasted better than shop-bought ones. The organic vegetables tasted better than shop-bought ones. They used only organic fertilizers in their garden. They used only organic fertilizers in their garden.
Pesticide.
She avoided using chemical pesticides in her garden. She avoided using chemical pesticides in her garden. The pesticide was applied carefully to avoid harming beneficial insects. The pesticide was applied carefully to avoid harming beneficial insects. They researched natural alternatives to pesticides. They researched natural alternatives to pesticides.
Insecticide.
She used an insecticide to control the aphid infestation. She used an insecticide to control the aphid infestation. The insecticide was organic and safe for beneficial insects. The insecticide was organic and safe for beneficial insects. They applied the insecticide in the evening to avoid harming bees. They applied the insecticide in the evening to avoid harming bees.
Aphid.
She noticed aphids on the rose bushes. She noticed aphids on the rose bushes. The aphids were damaging the new growth. The aphids were damaging the new growth. They introduced ladybirds to control the aphid population. They introduced ladybirds to control the aphid population.
Ladybird.
She was pleased to see ladybirds in the garden eating aphids. She was pleased to see ladybirds in the garden eating aphids. The ladybirds were beneficial insects that helped control pests. The ladybirds were beneficial insects that helped control pests. They encouraged ladybirds by planting flowers that attracted them. They encouraged ladybirds by planting flowers that attracted them.
Earthworm.
She was happy to see earthworms in the soil, indicating healthy earth. She was happy to see earthworms in the soil, indicating healthy earth. The earthworms helped aerate the soil and improve drainage. The earthworms helped aerate the soil and improve drainage. They added compost to encourage earthworm activity. They added compost to encourage earthworm activity.
Bee.
She planted flowers to attract bees to the garden. She planted flowers to attract bees to the garden. The bees were busy pollinating the flowers. The bees were busy pollinating the flowers. They installed a bee hotel to provide nesting sites. They installed a bee hotel to provide nesting sites.
Butterfly.
She created a butterfly garden with nectar-rich flowers. She created a butterfly garden with nectar-rich flowers. The butterflies were attracted to the colorful blooms. The butterflies were attracted to the colorful blooms. They planted milkweed to attract monarch butterflies. They planted milkweed to attract monarch butterflies.
Pollination.
She encouraged pollination by planting flowers that attracted bees. She encouraged pollination by planting flowers that attracted bees. The pollination was essential for the fruit trees to produce fruit. The pollination was essential for the fruit trees to produce fruit. They learned about the importance of pollination in gardening. They learned about the importance of pollination in gardening.
Harvest.
She was pleased with the abundant harvest from her vegetable garden. She was pleased with the abundant harvest from her vegetable garden. The harvest included tomatoes, peppers, and courgettes. The harvest included tomatoes, peppers, and courgettes. They shared their harvest with neighbors and friends. They shared their harvest with neighbors and friends.
Ripe.
She waited for the tomatoes to be ripe before picking them. She waited for the tomatoes to be ripe before picking them. The ripe fruit was sweet and ready to eat. The ripe fruit was sweet and ready to eat. They checked the vegetables daily to see if they were ripe. They checked the vegetables daily to see if they were ripe.
Wilt.
The plants began to wilt in the hot sun. The plants began to wilt in the hot sun. She watered the wilting flowers immediately. She watered the wilting flowers immediately. They noticed the leaves were starting to wilt from lack of water. They noticed the leaves were starting to wilt from lack of water.
To wilt.
The flowers began to wilt after being cut. The flowers began to wilt after being cut. They noticed the plants wilting during the drought. They noticed the plants wilting during the drought. We need to water these plants before they wilt completely. We need to water these plants before they wilt completely.
Courgette.
She harvested courgettes when they were small and tender. She harvested courgettes when they were small and tender. The courgettes grew quickly in the warm weather. The courgettes grew quickly in the warm weather. They planted courgette seeds in late spring. They planted courgette seeds in late spring.
Pepper.
She grew red and green peppers in the greenhouse. She grew red and green peppers in the greenhouse. The peppers needed plenty of warmth and sunlight. The peppers needed plenty of warmth and sunlight. They harvested the peppers when they reached full size. They harvested the peppers when they reached full size.
Cucumber.
She grew cucumbers on a trellis to save space. She grew cucumbers on a trellis to save space. The cucumbers were crisp and perfect for salads. The cucumbers were crisp and perfect for salads. They picked the cucumbers regularly to encourage more growth. They picked the cucumbers regularly to encourage more growth.